The Fall of the Lion of Judah, a chronicle of Emperor Haile Selassie's reign and downfall. Ethiopia, in the mid-20th century, was a nation walking a tightrope. It balanced precariously between a desire for modernization and a deep-seated fear of losing its hard-won autonomy. Emperor Haile Selassie, a shrewd and charismatic leader, navigated this complex landscape with a masterful hand, leveraging foreign aid, particularly from the United States, to full development while carefully guarding against complete dependence on any single power. His diplomatic dance was a delicate ballet, a constant negotiation between competing interests. In 1959, Selassie embarked on a significant state visit to the Soviet Union. The reception in Moscow was warm, with Premier Nikita Khrushchev promising over $100 million in development aid. This strategic move was followed by a trip to China, where Selassie met with Premier Zhou Enlai, securing further pledges of support. These diplomatic overtures served a dual purpose. They provided much-needed resources for Ethiopia's development and, perhaps more importantly, they allowed Selassie to extract even greater aid from the United States, which was increasingly wary of Soviet influence spreading across Africa. Selassie, ever the skilled diplomat, presented Ethiopia as a vital bulwark against communism, a key ally in the fight against the spread of Soviet ideology, deserving of substantial Western support. He skillfully played the superpowers against each other, extracting maximum benefit from their rivalry. Selassie's influence extended beyond the realm of policy and diplomacy. In 1966, he made a historic visit to Jamaica, where the Rastafarian community, deeply rooted in their belief in his divinity, hailed him as the King of Kings, the prophesied messianic figure from the Book of Revelation. This veneration, while bolstering his international image, also contributed to a growing sense of detachment from the realities of his own nation. While Selassie was lauded abroad, his frequent diplomatic travels began to weaken his authority at home. Critical internal issues festered, particularly the volatile situation in Eritrea. In 1962, Selassie made the fateful decision to dissolve the Ethiopian Eritrean Federation and incorporate Eritrea as Ethiopia's 14th province. This move, intended to consolidate his power, ignited a firestorm of resentment among Eritreans, who saw it as a blatant disregard for their autonomy and a betrayal of their aspirations for self-determination. The annexation fueled the rise of numerous guerrilla movements, the most prominent being the Muslim-oriented Eritrean Liberation Front, ELF, which aimed to establish an independent Arab Islamic state. These movements soon turned their guns not only against the Ethiopian authorities but also against each other, plunging Eritrea into a brutal and protracted civil war. As the conflict in Eritrea escalated, Prime Minister Aklolo Haptwood repeatedly urged the emperor to impose military rule. However, Ras Asret Kassa, the Governor-General of Eritrea, believed he had a better understanding of the situation and resisted such drastic measures. Initially, Selassie sided with Ras Asret, endorsing his policy of benign neglect, hoping to isolate the guerrillas diplomatically and avoid a full-scale confrontation. But as the violence intensified, the emperor, swayed by the prime minister's arguments, reversed his position and authorized General Teshome Egu, the military commander in Eritrea, to launch a major offensive against the ELF. Feeling marginalized and betrayed, Ras Asret resigned in protest and retreated to London, effectively abandoning his authority over Eritrean affairs. His departure proved to be a critical turning point. General Teshome was ambushed and killed by ELF forces on November 21, 1970. Selassie responded by declaring a state of emergency in Eritrea and appointing General Debrib Habsmeriam as military governor. The Ethiopian army launched a large-scale offensive, escalating the conflict into a brutal civil war that would continue for decades, ultimately culminating in Eritrea's independence in 1993. The internal discord within the Ethiopian leadership, coupled with the escalating conflict in Eritrea, exposed deep cracks in Selassie's administration. In a desperate attempt to consolidate control, the emperor recalled Ras Asret in 1971 and appointed him president of the Imperial Crown Council, a position second only to the emperor himself. Meanwhile, a shift in American foreign policy, triggered by Richard Nixon's unexpected victory in the 1968 U.S. presidential election, had profound implications for Ethiopia. The long-standing, close relationship between the two countries, cemented by the U.S. Kagnu Station, a massive intelligence and communications hub in Asmara, began to unravel. This sprawling facility, covering 14 square kilometers, was a vital asset during the Cold War, primarily used to monitor communications in the Red Sea region. The rent paid by Washington for the station formed the cornerstone of American military aid to Ethiopia. However, advancements in satellite technology in the early 1970s diminished the strategic value of the Kagnu station. As a result, the US began to scale back its commitments, a move that dealt a severe blow to Emperor Haile Selassie. Facing mounting security challenges in Eritrea and escalating tensions in the Ogaden region, where Somali leader Sayed Barre, backed by the Soviet Union, was aggressively pursuing territorial claims against Ethiopia, Selassie made 3 visits to Washington between 1969 and 1973, personally appealing to President Nixon for increased military aid. But even these personal appeals failed to achieve his desired outcome. In 1971, U.S. annual military assistance to Ethiopia was reduced from $12 million to $10.8 million. The final blow came in August 1973, when the U.S. announced the closure of the Kagnu station by the end of 1974. Washington began relocating its regional headquarters from Addis Ababa to Nairobi and encouraged American firms to invest in Kenya rather than Ethiopia. Desperate for international support, Selassie once again turned to the Soviet Union. In the autumn of 1973, he embarked on a state visit to Moscow, hoping to persuade the Kremlin to stop arming Sayed Barre's regime in Somalia. However, his reception in Moscow was lukewarm at best. The Soviets, unwilling to jeopardize their relationship with Somalia, delayed granting him an audience. When Selassie finally met with Party Secretary Leonid Brezhnev, his pleas were politely ignored. While his foreign alliances crumbled, Ethiopia faced growing internal instability. Selassie, who celebrated his 80th birthday in 1972, had made little effort to address the critical issue of succession. Crown Prince Asfor Wasson, once considered the natural heir, had lost his father's favor. His health further deteriorated when he suffered a debilitating stroke in early 1973. Selassie appointed Ras Asret as the Crown Prince's companion and sent him to Europe for medical treatment. Subsequently, the emperor made a belated attempt to name a successor. During Easter in 1974, he announced that the Crown Prince's son, 20-year-old Prince Zera Yacob, would be the acting heir apparent. Adding to the political and economic turmoil, a catastrophic famine ravaged the northern provinces of Tigray and Wollo in 1972. The crisis escalated into a full-scale humanitarian disaster, with hundreds of thousands of starving refugees streaming towards the capital in search of relief. While international aid organizations quietly began assisting in the drought-stricken regions, the Ethiopian government appeared slow to respond. Selassie's detachment from the crisis epitomized a regime increasingly out of touch with the realities facing its people. In Wollo alone, an estimated 40,000 to 80,000 people died of starvation between 1972 and 1973. A shocking revelation further eroded public trust in Selassie's leadership. At the height of the famine in 1973, Ethiopia exported over 200,000 tons of grain, the largest export surplus since 1967. This callous act, prioritizing foreign perception and economic gain over the lives of his own people, fueled widespread anger and resentment. When the emperor finally visited the famine-stricken provinces to witness the devastation firsthand, it was too late. The damage was irreparable. In 1974, Ethiopia was engulfed by a series of events that shattered the imperial order and plunged the nation into an uncertain future. At the heart of this upheaval was a shadowy military group, initially known as the Provisional Military Administrative Council, but better known as the DUG. Initially operating as an enigmatic force with no clear political agenda, the DUG quickly became the focal point of Ethiopia's growing discontent. Like all revolutions, the Ethiopian uprising needed a spark. In this case, it was the failure of a water pump in the town of Nejili Baran, near the Kenyan border, in January 1974. Officers of the 4th Army Division, stationed there, forbade their thirsty troops from drinking from the well used by commissioned ranks. The soldiers rebelled, taking their commanders captive and broadcasting their demands for better pay over the radio. This seemingly isolated mutiny revealed deeper fractures within the imperial system. In the capital, economic pressures had reached a breaking point. The ongoing drought, coupled with another international oil crisis, had caused the cost of basic foodstuffs,